Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this iteration of the Farm Program's Quick Conversation series. My name is Beverly Hampton Pfeiffer, and I am the Stakeholder Relations Manager for the Farm Program. Today, I'm joined by NMPF's Senior Director of Sustainability Initiatives, Nicole Ayache, and today our topic of discussion is workforce development. Nicole, do you want to give an introduction for yourself?
Yeah, hey everyone. So as Bev mentioned, my role at NMPF is Senior Director of Sustainability Initiatives, but with the farm program, I focus on two different areas. One on the environmental side, we had a conversation about that a couple months ago, and then I also focus on the labor space, so in particular our workforce development program area. So my day-to-day is really managing those two parts of the farm program, working with our organizations that implement those pillars with their members and with their producers, as well as helping to guide further development of the program and producer tools, co-op or processor tools, how do we evolve or advance over time, and communicate about it externally as well. So thank you all so much for joining today as we can dig into farm workforce development.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And so as a reminder to folks, our quick conversation series we started last fall, really focusing on just deep diving into the program areas and initiatives that we cover within the farm program. We will actually continue this initiative throughout 2021 on a monthly basis, trying to bring in and incorporate hot topics and different things that are relevant to the farm program and bringing in different subject matter experts and other personnel to discuss matters related to our program. So just again, as a reminder, the focus of these is to be able to directly interact with staff and other subject matter experts. So we really encourage that dairy farmers interact with us either via Zoom or on Facebook. These sessions are all recorded and will be posted on the farm program website in addition to other resources related to the topic. And with that, we also encourage you to submit as many questions as you may have. If we have time at the end of the sessions, then we will be being able to ask those to Nicole. If not, we'll leave some contact information for you guys to reach out to us additionally for follow-up. So if you're watching over on Zoom, if you hover below the screen, the slides there, it should raise up some options there. So either through the chat feature or the Q&A feature, you can submit questions for Nicole, as well as if you're looking over on Facebook, there in the comment section, you can just type your question in there. So to go ahead and get started, I think the big question, probably what most folks who are new to the program and maybe have not heard about workforce development before, Nicole, can you just give us an overview of what this program area is?
Yeah, thanks, Bev. And certainly throughout this session, we'll dig into some of the details of farm workforce development. But just to give a high-level overview, this pillar of the farm program focuses on HR, human resources, and safety topics on the farm. And we really have two buckets of programming, I would say, under farm workforce development. So the one piece is we have a large number of producer resources that are free on our website, many of which are even bilingual, English, Spanish, an HR manual, a safety manual, templates, tip sheets, things to really help producers advance their HR and safety. And then the other big piece of this pillar of the farm program, like the rest of farm, is providing external assurance. And so farm workforce development does that with a second party evaluation tool that we'll talk about a little bit later. But that tool looks at best practices with regards to HR and safety. And it's a tool to work with producers on identifying which best practices might be useful for their operation, how could they go about implementing them, and then through that process, provide those supply chain assurances. And the evaluation tool, I should mention, is a opt-in voluntary tool that our co-ops and processors can use with their farms.
Thanks. And can you speak a little bit about why now? Why do we need a program like this? Why is this something that farm is focusing on?
Yeah, and I like to think of the why from two different angles. So one really being that internal industry piece. So what are our internal industry needs with regards to HR and safety? And then also that external pressure piece. Because I think what we found is those two things collided or really came to be high priorities at the same time. And so from that internal industry side, I don't think it's any secret that if you ask a dairy producer why they went into dairying or why they're a dairy farmer, they're probably not going to say because I wanted to be an HR manager. That's just not really why you go into it, but it becomes part of the job for many producers if they even have just one employee or if they have many more than that. Just becomes part of what they do. And along with that, safety management as well. But from that HR piece, it's not necessarily the background of many of our producers. Maybe they have an animal science background, veterinary background, business background, but not as much on that HR piece. So what can we do to help ourselves, especially given that labor is such a pain point? So whether that's finding labor, retaining labor, we know it's tough out there. So what can we do through farm to get resources out there to producers to help in that area? And the other piece of that is that safety side. I think, we all know safety is important to everyone, whether that's, to our producers, to our employees. Everyone cares about safety and everyone wants themselves, their families, and their employees to go home safely. But caring isn't always what's going to get us over that finish line of how do we make sure that happens. And so how can we start rethinking safety in a different way, whether that's trying to identify if there are more formal ways we can approach it or different ways to think about safety training or other approaches to safety that'll get us those better outcomes that we want. Because, even though we've been improving, we don't want there to be any fatalities. We don't want there to be any incidences. So how can we start to even move that needle further than what we have over the past years? So that's kind of what I bucket as those internal needs and what farm workforce development helps with. And then that other side is that external pressure. And this is where you'll see on the slide, I talk about customers and consumers. I can't think of any major large dairy buyer, dairy company in the US that hasn't asked about labor in some way. So some of them, it's maybe more formal. They're actually asking questions of their suppliers. Some, it might just be that they've started to raise the topic. And it could be because they're looking at labor for anything, whether it's agricultural or other. They're just trying to say, okay, what's going on in our supply chain? And for some, it's because dairy maybe is a major part of their supply chain, a major product area for them. So they really want to dig in on that dairy labor piece because they think, from that brand reputation side, they want to ensure that it's not just them and their four walls are doing a good job with labor, but they want to make sure, okay, are there any risks in my supply chain? Anything that we need to be working on so that we're not exposing our brand or our retail business to any kind of risk. And certainly, they recognize the reality of on-farm labor today as well, that labor retention is difficult, finding labor is difficult. So they also do think about it from that, longevity of the dairy industry. How can they support their supply chain? So from that customer and consumer piece, there's a lot of interest. There are interest groups that have been raising this issue as well. And so farm workforce development is really our opportunity to help meet our industry needs and also help address those external questions about dairy labor and share our story of continuous improvement.
And when National Milk and Farm decided to identify these best practices, what was the strategy there? What organizations helped to identify those? What groups did Farm work with?
Yeah, I think a key strength of our approach with farm workforce development is that we started from the beginning with a collaborative approach of how can we work with subject matter experts, academics, dairy farmers, farm workers, co-op staff, and others from across the country to build the program, to work on both the strategy development, the producer resources, and the evaluation. And I think this is really important for a couple reasons. One is, there's a lot of good work going out there already, whether it's at Extension, whether it's through consultants, whatever it might be. There's a lot of HR and safety programming out there. And so our role isn't to reinvent the wheel, but really to say, can you share what you're doing in your area so we can raise it to the national level? And then second, of course, is just that simple fact that we need input. We need diverse input. We need everyone telling us, hey, does this work for me on my dairy? Does this not? What's an idea of what we could do differently or a resource that we need to provide? So having that wide collaboration helps us build a really good program.
As far as, and again, one of the most popular questions we get and most common questions within all of our program areas is speaks to specific farmer input. So can you share with us how farmers were involved in this process, whether that was identifying standards, piloting, or approving the standards that and best management practices within workforce development?
Yeah, and I think it's a very important question, and I think we'll cover a couple different ways that we've had producers involved in farm workforce development. So one is really through this formal governance structure, and that's what this slide presents. Like the rest of the farm program pillars, we have a governance structure set up to ensure that there are many points of contact with organizations and producers to vet what we're doing. And in the case of farm workforce development, you'll see here at the bottom, we have the Farmer Advisory Council, which is composed entirely of producers. They provide guidance and input into the work that we do for farm program as a whole. We also had a pilot program that I'll hold off on just a moment, but I'll talk about here soon. But then really that workforce development task force, that group has been meeting since about late 2017 to put together farm workforce development. And that's composed of a whole mix of individuals, but 30% of whom are producers. And that's important, again, so that we have that producer's perspective in that strategic guidance for what we're doing for farm workforce development and being that first set of eyes on any of the resources or the evaluation tool that we put together. And then up the chain, the executive committee and the board of directors, they're the ones that'll review and approve anything that we put out there that'll become, a formal part of the farm program. So for farm workforce development, that means the evaluation tool that we put together. So when we drafted the evaluation tool, put it through that pilot program and the public comment period, after that was all, the feedback was incorporated, we took it to the executive committee to ask for their review and recommendation on whether it should be a voluntary part of farm. And then that went up to the board of directors for final approval. But you'll see for those in red, those have a much larger percentage of producer representation as well, to get eyes on kind of that evaluation tool as well as their approval to make it part of the farm program. And I think the next slide talks a little bit about the pilot program in more depth. So this is why I wanted to hold off a little and dig in deeper here. So that evaluation tool, I've talked about it here and there, but that's really, it's a best practice assessment guide looking at HR and safety best practices that can be valuable on the dairy. And I wanted to share a little bit about how we created that. So we started first with our HR and safety self-assessments that were created by subject matter experts that went through the review process with a task force. And we took those self-assessments that were, I think they're each about 100 questions, and tried to determine how can we prioritize. And we, being, again, those subject matter experts and that task force, looked at it and said, where are the priority areas to focus in on? And then let's create the evaluation tool from there. Went through that process and drafted it, and then certainly you come up with this evaluation tool, you draft it, but you really need to pilot it on the ground to know if it's going to be useful and if it's going to work. And so 10 organizations stepped up to pilot the evaluation tool with their producers. So they collectively, they tested it with 45 dairy producers that ranged in size and geography from across the country, from, I think there was a 60 cow dairy may have been the smallest, to something on the order of, and someone's gonna, I know the person on here probably is gonna correct me, I think it was 8,000 to 10,000 cow dairy as well. So if you think of that range, it also represents a range of number of employees. And we asked producers to provide us anonymous feedback. So they would just be honest. We had a feedback form. I didn't want them to feel like they were gonna hurt any feelings if they wanted to give very constructive feedback. And it was a really great process to get that producer input. overall what we found was there was a general sense that the evaluation tool on the HR and the safety side were both helpful tools. The questions led to good discussions with the evaluator, led to some dairies thinking about things in a different way. And we also got some constructive feedback. So I think there were a lot of questions from our smaller producers. How is this going to work for me? I only have 2 employees. What does this look like on my dairy? And that led to us making a commitment to the NMPF board of directors that, we'll take into account the feedback overall, and then we'll also come up with version 1.1, what we're calling a next version of the evaluation tool that contains tailored guidance for smaller producers. So we really want to meet that need of across the spectrum that these best practices are going to look different if you have only 1 or 2 employees versus maybe if you have 50 employees. It doesn't mean that the best practice isn't useful, but it just might look different. So that's, I hope that shares a little bit of how we involve producers in the process of finalizing this evaluation tool.
Yeah, and I know another important component to the buildup and the development of the program was really, you spoke a little bit about how long this has been a quick process. We've really started this conversation back in 2017. So maybe speak a little bit about the labor survey that was conducted and what we found out from that survey.
Yeah, thank you, Bev. When we all started back in 2017, and I think there was a first meeting in 2017, another one in 2018. That workforce development task force identified that, one really important piece of this is knowing where we start. Like, where do we start when it comes to labor practices, both HR and safety? And there are great research pieces out there. There's a lot of great work out of New York, for example. I know of several research projects in Michigan as well, different survey work, but those are often regional. And so we really identified a gap from that national perspective that we wanted to know where we stood today as an industry. So we worked, this is back in 2019, to develop a survey, an anonymous survey. So it went out to producers across the country to better understand what they're doing today on HR and safety topics. Things that aren't going to be in our evaluation tool because they're really private and competitive issues for dairies, things like wages, but things that we wanted to be able to know about as an industry to be able to say, where do we stand today? Where are our real strong suits as an industry, and where are there areas where maybe we can improve? So I won't go into too many details on the results here. I think there are some highlights on the slide, but I really just encourage those that are interested to take a look at our website. We have the entire survey report there. It was conducted by Texas A&M. They have a Center for North American Studies. So we really just worked with them to give them information, but they went ahead and conducted the survey, did all of the analysis, since certainly as academic experts, they're really the ones to do this type of research work. And we'll use those findings to inform what we do in farm workforce development, to develop communications material. And I'll also flag the researchers did a turnover analysis. So part of what we did in the survey was we asked about turnover, and they had the great idea to say, why don't we dig in deeper? Why don't we look at least the data we have in this survey and see, what can we find out about factors on the dairy that might lead to turnover or that might be correlated with it. It's really just one beginning look at how can we get at that turnover piece that we know is a pain point. So that'll be coming out soon. Once we put the final touches on it, we'll make it available as well.
Thanks. And the workforce development evaluation makes the third on-farm evaluation assessment that we have within the farm program. So can you speak a little bit about what the difference or similarities between the animal care evaluation and workforce development? How are we assessing standards in this program area versus animal care?
I think you're absolutely right. We have these 3 evaluation tools, and they all look a little different because there's a different context and different needs. And for workforce development, right from the beginning, when we set out to put this together, I think a common thread from everyone involved was, hey, there are a lot of laws and regulations when it comes to labor. Like, our dairy producers like all small businesses, like all farms, they have to adhere to a lot of state and federal labor laws and regulations. And so we, as the farm program, as all of the task force was thinking of how to put this together, our goal is we don't want to duplicate those efforts. Like laws and regulations, that's the purview of those state and federal organizations that administer them. That's not what the farm program is set out to do. We tried to look at, okay, what can we do that's different that'll add value? So we looked at what are the best practices that can happen on the farm that, yes, they might help you with compliance, but we're not out there checking compliance. And so in that way, we aren't standards-based. It's not the farm workforce development evaluation isn't saying, you must do these things because we already have laws and regulations that are spelling out what the standards are. Instead, the tool is really meant to share best practices that aren't mandatory. And in fact, I would say for a lot of producers today, they're probably not implementing a lot of them. And that's an okay starting point. It's not about you should be doing 100% of these. Today, you might be doing 5%. But can you, through this evaluation, through the discussion with the evaluator, identify maybe that one next practice that you want to implement on your dairy that you think would be useful for you and for your employees and will move the needle on HR and safety. So it's about, again, making that progress, that slow progress from whatever starting point a producer is on, to have their own journey of figuring out what best practices might be useful. So in that way, it's a little different. Again, it's not standards-based, it's best practices, but similar to everything we do, it does promote continuous improvement. And so each best practice contains, in our evaluation tool, the evaluator has access to kind of some explanation of it for why it's useful for a dairy and then what a dairy could do about it. So let's say a dairy says, yes, that is something we want to think about for our operation. There might be a link to a template. There might be a section in our HR or safety manual. There will be resources to help support that continuous improvement.
Thanks. And, speaking specifically about what's happening on the farm level, what are the expectations of farmers who are participating in this program area?
Yeah, and we just put together, I'm glad you asked, so one resource, I don't even know if it's on our website quite yet. You can tell me that, Bev. But we have a workforce development prep guide. So similar to what we did in animal care and environmental stewardship, we put together a guide for producers on the workforce development program and the evaluation. And so in there, it goes into a lot more depth about, what is the evaluation tool? What is the program? If I'm going to get evaluated, how should I prepare? Like if there are documents you want to get together beforehand, how to do that. So I certainly recommend that prep guide as a resource. But just generally the expectations that are expected of a producer in workforce development would just be, answering questions honestly. A lot of the evaluation relies on that interview between the evaluator and the owner or manager. So just be responding to questions, providing documents for document review to the best of their ability. Again, our starting point is going to be different depending on who we're talking to. So they may not have these documents, and that's okay. But just the best of the ability to provide them. And then there are certain items for that through the evaluation would have an observation or some kind of demonstration. And so the expectation of the producer would be to allow the evaluator to observe those items.
So in terms of resources, what is offered in the workforce development space?
Yeah, and I've touched on this here and there, but I'm glad we have the opportunity to dig in because there are a number of resources on our website that I want to highlight. So if you go to nationaldairyfarm.com, you can navigate to a resources section, or you can go straight to workforce development, and there will be a link to the resources as well. But we have an HR manual, a safety manual. We have state-by-state legal fact sheets that outline the HR and safety laws in each state, and at the federal level, we have self-assessments and tip sheets, templates that you can download and tailor to your operation. That's a lot of what the farm program has put together. And then we also have a training and learning library. And so this is where we've collected links to external organizations that have even more resources for producers. And so we'll keep adding to that over time, but that's an area where you can go to see links to training videos, other HR sites through different extension, different groups. I think there's a certificate generator on that page as well. So if you have employees that are going through training and maybe there isn't any kind of formal recognition through the training, you can actually create your own certificate to acknowledge that they went through a training. So that's some of the resources, and the workforce development prep guide that's new and on there as well. So definitely take some time to check out all the different resources.
Yeah, and speaking of resources, you know, one area that was not the plan in 2017 to focus on or build out or to spend a whole year reacting to is COVID, and something that fits in, you know, is very relevant to managing a labor workforce and on farm in general. So can you speak a little bit about what NMPF and Farm has done to assist in response to COVID?
Yeah, and I will say, if anyone was following along some of the timeline, our evaluation tool was approved by the board last March for workforce development, and then COVID hit. And so, you know, there was, I think, both at our producer level, at our co-ops, for NMPF as a whole, there was this sudden shift of thinking of, okay, what do we do about this new and emerging reality? And from the NMPF side and from the farm program side, we worked pretty quickly and hard to put together a set of resources, links, materials related to coronavirus. And so for those that maybe don't have the slides up, if you go to nmpf.org/coronavirus, there are a number of resources available for producers, for processors, for co-ops related to COVID. So I think that that's an important piece to mention. And certainly that COVID piece did change some of our ability to roll out farm workforce development. You know, certainly we want on-farm evaluations to occur because we think it's valuable. But because of COVID, that really wasn't the way that our producers or our co-ops needed to spend their time right at the beginning there. You know, it shifted priorities. It shifted to, how do we meet this supply and demand? How do we keep employees safe from this new pandemic? Certainly they can use our resources, our safety resources, to get some more information and everything that we have on the COVID page. But I think, you know, it shifted a lot of people's priorities for quite a long time to really address just this new reality.
Good points there. And so obviously in the time that we've had, we've discussed a lot, and there's a lot more to discuss, and maybe specific questions that producers may have. So how would they go out to find more information about the program, or if their organization is participating in the program?
Yeah, I think the best place to start, you know, your farm program evaluator is going to be a great person to speak with. So to find out more about whether your organization is participating or not, and get some more information. You know, it is new, so a lot of organizations either haven't yet signed on or maybe have just started. But hopefully your farm evaluator would be able to give you some information about it. And then certainly our website. You know, I've already mentioned it a couple times, but that's a great place to start to get some more information. We do have our a contact form is in there as well. So if there are specific questions, those go to our inbox, and we'll address them in a timely manner.
Thanks, Nicole. And we are pushing up on time a little bit, but we do have several questions, so we'll take a few of those now. So if you haven't had a chance to submit your questions, just a reminder, on the Facebook side, you can submit them on in the comment section, and on Zoom with that Q&A or chat feature is an option as well. So we have a question that asks specifically about the legal requirements of the states. I assume it's referring to the legal fact sheets. How are those updated? How often? How do we know that the information in those are accurate?
Good question. So we work with a law firm that specializes in labor and employment issues. So they've crafted the legal fact sheets, and they do annual review as well. So some of them are still that are on the website are a little old. They have the date on them for when they were last reviewed. But they all went through a review process in 2020. We're just getting some of those stragglers up on the website. And we'll also continue to do yearly reviews, and not, I should say, the lawyers do the reviews and we post them on the website, but we'll do that annually.
Okay. And is this program, we get this question with all the program areas, but is workforce development mandatory for all dairy farmers, or how do participants or organizations participate in this program?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the way we've approached farm workforce development in collaboration with our task force and getting their input is we're really taking the same approach as version 1 of animal care, in that it's really up to the co-op or the processor, the one that participates in the farm program, to determine how they're going to use the evaluation tool. So there's no requirement that it gets rolled out to 100% of farms. That's really up to that organization to determine the best approach with their producers. And that may vary based on their needs, based on how they see it being valuable for their membership or for their supply chain communications, or whatever their needs might be. So it is not mandatory. It's a voluntary opt-in for those organizations to determine how best to participate.
Thanks. And we have some folks on who have already seen and utilized the safety self-assessment document, and are just curious, what are the similarities between that resource and the evaluation?
Yeah, now I would have to refresh myself on some of the specifics, but essentially the evaluation tool is probably a condensed version of the self-assessment, is how best to describe it. So we took questions and topics from the self-assessment for the evaluation tool. For the safety one, some of it is we combined some of the questions and topics in the self-assessment. For others, we determined that maybe they weren't the top priority right now, so we left them out of the actual evaluation tool. But you'll find that they are similar. They ask about similar questions, because the self-assessments were designed to really go hand in hand with the manual, and we wanted the evaluation tool to also go hand in hand with our manuals, so that if a producer is going through the evaluation and they really want to take on some next steps, they have a resource to do that. So you'll see that the self-assessment and the evaluation tool, they do line up in a lot of ways, but the evaluation tool is more streamlined and condensed.
Thanks. And can you speak a little bit about how the actual employees on a dairy farm are involved, maybe in the process of developing this a little bit more, as well as when an evaluation is occurring, what's their involvement?
Yeah, it's a good question. So maybe first on that development piece, we had the opportunity to have a few dairy employees, part of our task force, or part of our working groups, in fact, who did some of the review of the HR manual, the safety manual, and the self-assessments. So similar to how we made our efforts to have producers represented, we also had some dairy employees. And in particular, in that safety area, we partnered with Idaho Dairymen's Association to develop our materials on the safety side. And they have an advisory group composed of academic experts, producers, as well as dairy employees. So in that way, there was additional review of especially some of those safety materials. And then in terms of the actual evaluation tool itself, the primary format of the evaluation today is an interview and document review with the owner and manager. But for a few topics, we encourage an employee interview as well. So not for the entire evaluation, but for a couple particular topics. There's the opportunity over time as it evolves that we may expand that. But really our thinking was let's start with the owner manager and start with better understanding how the operation is approaching HR and safety, in particular because these HR and safety topics are really sensitive, and we want to make sure that our evaluators can speak in a common language with employees if they're going to do any kind of employee interviews, And then B, are really well equipped and knowledgeable in these topic areas, because again, these are pretty sensitive topics. So we didn't want to just send evaluators out there to do lots of employee interviews and employee engagement when, we're just starting out with this program. So like I said, there are a couple employee interviews as part of this, and perhaps in future versions that may expand.
And then the last question that we'll have is, can you speak a little bit about how farm workforce development fits into the need for having access to a legal workforce on dairy farms?
Yeah, and that's, in some ways, it's a little outside the scope of the farm program. So hopefully I can address this question for this individual. But NMPF as a whole has long had a focus in its labor work on continuing to build access to a labor workforce, and part of that is immigration reform. So NMPF and colleagues that we all have worked pretty hard on immigration reform and have for years. So farm workforce development isn't necessarily part of those efforts around immigration reform or access to a workforce in terms of immigration. That said, the way that I see the connection is that farm workforce development is really looking to enhance work environments and promote labor retention and recruitment. So really helping dairies become employers of choice. So how do we make it so when someone's thinking, hey, I need a job, that dairy is top of mind, and that they think of a dairy environment as really where they want to work in that rural environment. So really, it kind of connects, but it's not exactly the same topics. And certainly that immigration reform piece is going to be more on the NMPF side than on the farm program side.
Thanks, Nicole. And I know that was a lot of information to cover. So if you have any additional questions as a follow-up, please feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information will be at the end. Just before we sign off, just a reminder that we are continuing this series throughout the rest of 2021. Our next quick conversation will be on March 10th at 2:30, and we'll be with Dr. Hans Kutze of Kansas State University and their vet school, focusing on providing pain mitigation when disbudding dairy calves. Additionally, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us at that dairyfarm@nmpf.org email address, or visit our website to check out this recording, as well as some other resources that we'll tag on this page as well. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.